I want to start by thanking you for joining me. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to listen or to read along with me as I read from these amazing essays written by Ralph Waldo Emerson. These essays were written in the 1800s. They are powerful insights about virtues, about being virtuous, and about being spiritual. Currently, Ralph Waldo Emerson is discussing, in this particular essay, he's discussing the virtues of the English people. Please feel free to share your feedback, your thoughts, your comments, your insights, and also please don't hesitate to let me know what you think of my reading style. I look forward to hearing from you. Please subscribe if you haven't already. I look forward to hearing from you. That's very kind of you. And please do dislike or like this video, whichever you prefer. I shall continue. No hope, no sublime augury cheers the student, no secure striding from experiment onward to a foreseen law, but only a casual dipping here and there, like daggers in California, prospecting for a placer, that will play a horizon of brass of the diameter of his umbrella, shuts down around the senses, squalid contentment with conventions, satire at the names of philosophy and religion, parochial and shop-till politics, and idolatry of usage betray the ebb of life and spirit, as they trample on nationalities to reproduce London and Londoners in Europe and Asia. So they fear the hostility of ideas and poetry, of religion ghosts which they cannot lay, and having attempted to domesticate and dress the blessed soul itself in English broadcloth and gaiters, they are tormented with fear that herein lurks a force that will sweep their system away. The artists say, quote, nature puts them out, end quote. The scholars have been unideal. They parry earnest speech with banner and levity. They laugh you down or they change the subject. Quote, the fact is, end quote, say they over their wine. Quote, all that about liberty and so forth is gone by. It won't do any longer, end quote. The practical and comfortable oppress them with inexorable claims, and the smallest fraction of power remains from heroism and poetry. No poet does murmur of beauty out of the precinct of his rhymes. No priest dares hint at a providence which does not respect English utility. The island is a roaring volcano of fate, of material values, of tariffs and laws of repression, glutted markets and low prices. In the absence of the highest aims of the pure love of knowledge and the surrender to nature, there is the suppression of the imagination, the priapism of the senses and the understanding. We have the facetious instead of the natural, tasteless expense, arts of comfort and rewarding as an illustrious inventor. Whosoever will contrive one impediment more to interpose between the man and his objects. Thus poetry is degraded and made ornamental. Pope and his school wrote poetry fit to put round frosted cake. What did Walter Scott write without stint? A rhyme traveller guide to Scotland, and the libraries of verses they print have this Birmingham character. How many volumes of well-bred meter we must jingle through before we can be filled, taught, renewed? We want the miraculous, the beauty which can manufacture at no mill, can give no account of, the beauty of which Chaucer and Chapman had the secret. The poetry, of course, is low and prosaic, only now and then, as in Wordsworth, conscientious, or Byron, passionate, or Tennyson, facetious. But if I should count the poets who have contributed to the Bible of existing England sentences of guidance and consolation, which are still glowing and effective, how few shall I find my heavenly bred and reigning poets? What is great design in modern English poetry? The English have lost sight of the fact that poetry exists to speak the spiritual law, and that no wealth of description or of fancy is yet essentially new and out of the limits of prose until this condition is reached. Therefore, the grave old poets like the Greek artists heeded their designs and less considered the finish. It was their office to lead the divine sources out of which all this and much more readily springs. And if this religion is in the poetry, it raises us to some purpose, and we can well afford some stateliness or hardness, or want a popular tune in the verses. The exceptional fact of the period of the genius of Wordsworth, he said no master but nature and solitude. Quote, he wrote a poem, end quote, says Landor, quote, without the aid of war, end quote. His verse is a voice of sanity in a worldly and ambitious age. One regrets that his temperament was no more liquid and musical. He has written longer than he was inspired, but for the rest, he has no competitor. Tennyson is endowed precisely in points where Wordsworth wanted. There's no finer ear, no more command of the keys of language. Cooler like the dawn flows over the horizon from his pencil, and waves so rich that we do not miss the essential form. Through all his refinements, too, he has reached the public a certificate of good sense and general power. Since he was pious, to be the English poet must be as large as London, not in the same kind as London, but in his own kind. But he wants a subject, and climbs no mount of vision to bring its secrets to the people. He contents himself with describing the Englishman as he is, and proposes no better. There are all degrees in poetry, and we must be thankful for every beautiful talent. But it is only a first success when the ear is gained. The best office of the best poets has been to show how low and uninspired was the general style, and that only once or twice they have struck the high court. That expansiveness, which is the essence of the poetic element, they have not. It was no Oxonian, but Hafiz, who said, quote, let us be crowned with roses, let us drink wine, and break up the tiresome old roof of heaven into new forms, end quote. A stanza of the Song of Nature the Oxonian has no ear for, and he does not value the salient and curative influence of intellectual action. Studious of truth without a by-end. By the law of contraries, I look for irresistible taste for Orientalism and Britain, for a self-conceited, modish life, made up of trifles clinging to a corporal civilization. Heating ideas, there is no remedy like the Oriental largeness that astonishes and disconcerts English decorum. For once, there is thunder it never heard, light it never saw, and power which trifles with time and space. I'm not surprised then to find an Englishman like Warren Hastings, who had been struck with the grand style of thinking in the Indian writings, deprecating the prejudices of his countrymen, while offering them a translation of the Bhagavat. Quote, might I, an unlettered man, venture to prescribe bounds to the latitude of criticism? I should exclude, in estimating the merit of such a production, all rules drawn from the ancient or modern literature of Europe, all references to such sentiments or manners as are become the standards of propriety for opinion and action in our own modes and equally all appeals to our revealed talents of religion and moral duty. End quote. He goes to bespeak indulgence to, quote, ornaments of fancy, unsuited to our tastes, and passages elevated to a tract of sublimity, into which our habits of judgment will find it difficult to pursue them. End quote. Meantime, I know that a retreating power lies in the English race, which seems to make any recoil possible. In other words, there is at all times a minority of profound minds existing in the nation, capable of appreciating every soaring of intellect and every hint of tendency, while the constructive talent seems dwarfed and superficial. The criticism is often in the noblest tone and suggests the presence of the invisible gods. I can well believe what I have often heard, that there are two nations in England, but it is not the poor and the rich, nor is it the Normans and Saxons, nor the Celt and the Goth. These are each always becoming the other, for Robert Owen does not exaggerate the power of circumstance, but the two complexions or two styles of mind, the preceptive class and the practical finality class, are ever in counterpoise, interacting mutually, one in hopeless minorities, the other in huge masses, one studious, contemplative, experimenting, the other the ungrateful pupil, scornful of the source, whilst availing itself of the knowledge for gain. These two nations, a genius and of animal force, though the first consists of only 12 souls and the second of 20 millions, forever by their discord and their accord, yield the power of the English state. Chapter 15. The Times. The power of the newspaper is familiar in America, and in accordance with our political system. In England, it stands in antagonism with feudal institutions, and it is all the more beneficent succor against the secretive tendencies of a monarchy. The celebrated Lord Somers, quote, knew of no good law proposed and passed in his time, to which the public papers had not directed his attention. There is, end quote, there is no corner and no night. A relentless inquisition drags every secret to the day, turns the glare of the solar microscope on every malfeasance, as to make the public a more terrible spy than any foreigner. And no weakness can be taken advantage of by the enemy, since the whole people are already forewarned. Thus England rid itself of those incrustations which have been the ruin of old states. Of course, this inspection is feared. No antique privilege, no comfortable monopoly, but see surely that its days are counted. The people are familiarized with the reason of reform, and one by one take away every argument of the obstructive. Quote, so your grace like the comfort of reading the newspapers? End quote, said Lord Mansfield to the Duke of Northumberland. Quote, mark my words, you and I shall not live to see it, but this young gentleman, Lord Eldon, may, or it may be a little later, but a little sooner or later, these newspapers will most assuredly write the Dukes of Northumberland out of their titles and possessions, and the country out of its king. End quote. The tendency in England towards social and political institutions like those of America is inevitable, and the ability of its journals is the driving force. England is full of manly, clever, well-bred men who possess the talent of writing offhand pungent paragraphs, expressing with clearness and courage their opinion on any person or performance, valuable or not, It is a skill that is really found out of the English journals. The English do this as they write poetry, as they write in books, by being educated to it hundreds of clever prodigies and theories and Freudies and hoods and hooks and McGinns and Mills and Machiavellis make poems or short essays for a journal, as they make speeches in Parliament and on the hustings, or as they shoot and ride. It is quite accidental and arbitrary. It is quite accidental and arbitrary direction of their general ability. Rude health and spirits, an Oxford education and the habits of society are implied, but not a ray of genius. It comes of the crowded state of the professions, the violent interests which all men take in politics, the faculty of experimenting in the journals and high pay. The most conspicuous result of this talent is the Times newspaper. No power in England is more felt, more feared, or more obeyed. What you read in the morning is in that journal you shall hear in the evening in all society. It has ears everywhere, and its information is earliest, completest, and surest. It has risen year by year and victory by victory to its present authority. I asked one of its old contributors whether it had once been able than it is now. Quote, never, end quote, he said. Quote, these are its palmiest days, end quote. It has shown these qualities which are dear to Englishmen: unflinching adherence to its objects, prodigal intellectual ability, and a towering assurance, backed by the perfect organization in its printing house and its worldwide network of correspondence and reports. It has its own history and famous trophies. In 1820, it adopted the cause of Queen Caroline and carried it against the king. It adopted a poor law system, and almost alone lifted it through. When Lord Brougham was in power, it decided against him and pulled him down. It declared war against Ireland and conquered it. It adopted the League against the Corn Laws, and when Cobden had begun to despair, it announced his triumph. It denounced and discredited the French Republic of 1848 and checked every sympathy with it in England, until it had enrolled 200,000 special constables to watch the Chartists and make them ridiculous on the 10th April. It first denounced and then adopted the new French Empire and urged the French alliance and its results. It has entered into each municipal, literary, and social question, almost with a controlling voice. It has done bold and seasonable service in exposing frauds which threatens the commercial community. Meantime, it attacks its rivals by reforming its printing machinery. It will drive them out of circulation, for the only limit of the circulation of the Times is the ability of printing copies fast enough. Since a daily paper can only be new and reasonable for a few hours, it will kill all but that paper, which is diametrically in opposition. Since many papers, first and last, have lived by their attacks on the leading journal. The late Mr. Waldo was printer of the Times and had gradually arranged the whole material in its perfect system. It is told that when he demanded a small share in the propriety and was refused, he said, quote, as you please, gentlemen, and you may take away the Times from this office when you will. I shall publish the new Times next Monday morning, end quote. The proprietors, who had already complained that his charges for printing were excessive, found that they were in his power and gave him whatever he wished. I went one day with a good friend to the Times office, which was entered through a pretty garden yard and printing house square. We walked with some circumspection, as if we were entering a powder mill, but the door was opened by a mild old woman, and by dint of some transmission of cards, we were at last conducted into the parlor of Mr. Morris, a very gentle person, with no hostile appearances. The statistics are now quite out of date, but I remember he told us that the daily printing was then 35,000 copies. That on the 1st of March 1848, the greatest number ever printed, 54,000, were issued. That since February, the daily circulation had increased by 8,000 copies. The whole press they were then using printed 5 or 6,000 sheets per hour. The new machine, for which they were then building an engine, would print 12,000 per hour. Our entertainer confided us to a courteous assistant to show us the establishment, in which I think they employed 120 men. I remember I saw the reporter's room, in which they redact and hastily stenographs, but the editor's room and who is in it I did not see, though I shared the curiosity of mankind respecting it. The staff of the Times has always been made up of able men. Old Walter, Sterling, Bacon, Barnes, Alsiger, Horace, Twist, Jones Lloyd, John Oxenford, Mr. Mosley, Mr. Bailey have contributed to its renown in their special departments, but it has never wanted the first pence for occasional assistance. Its private information is inexplicable and recalls the stories of French's police, whose omniscience made it believed that the Empress Josephine must be in his pay. It has a mercantile and political correspondence. It has mercantile and political correspondence in every foreign city, and its expresses outrun the dispatches of the government. One hears anecdotes of the rise of its servants as the functionaries of the India House. I was told of the dexterity of one of its reporters, who, finding himself on one occasion where the magistrates had strictly forbidden reporters, put his hands into his coat pocket, and with pencil in one hand and a tablet in the other, did his work. The influence of this journal is a recognized power in Europe, and of course none is more conscious of it than its conductors. The tone of its articles has often been the occasion of comment from the official organs of the continental courts, and sometimes the ground of a diplomatic complaint. What will the Times say is a terror in Paris, in Berlin, in Vienna, in Copenhagen, and in Nepal. Its consummate discretion and success exhibit the English skill of combination. The daily paper is the work of many hands, chiefly, it is said, of young men recently from the university, and perhaps reading law in chambers in London. Hence the academic elegance and classic allusion which adorns its columns. Hence, too, the heat and gallantry of its onset. But the steadiness of the aim suggests the belief that this fire is directed and fed by older engineers, as of persons of exact information, and with settled view of policies applied, the writers with the basis of fact and the object to be attained, and availed themselves of their younger energy and eloquence to plead the cause. Both the council and the executive department gain by the division of two men of equal ability. The one who does not write but keeps his eye on the course of public affairs will have the higher judicial wisdom. But the parts are kept in concert. All the articles appear to proceed from a single will. The Times never disapproves of what it has. The Times never disapproves of what has said, or cripples itself by apology for the absence of the editor or the indiscretion of him who held the pen. It speaks out bluff and bold, and sticks to what it says. It draws from any number of learned and skillful contributors, but a more learned and skillful person supervises, corrects, and coordinates. Of this closet the secret does not transpire. No writer is suffered to claim the authorship of any paper. Everything good from whatever quarter comes editorially, and thus by making the paper everything, and those who write it nothing. The character and the awe of the journal again. The English like it for its complete information, A statement, a statement of fact in the is I beg your pardon. A statement of fact in the Times is as reliable as a citation from Hansard. Then they like its independence. They do not know when they take it up what the paper is going to say, but above all, for the nationality and confidence of its tone. It thinks for them all. It is their understanding and day's ideal, daguerreotyped. When I see them reading its columns, they seem to me becoming every moment more British. It has the national courage, not rash and petulant, but considerate and determined. No dignity or wealth is a shield from its assault. It attacks a duke as readily as a policeman, and with the most provoking airs of condensation. It makes rude work with the Board of Admiralty. The bench of bishops is less safe. The bench of bishops is still less safe. One bishop fears badly for his rapacity, another for his bigotry, and a third for his courtliness. It addresses occasionally a hint to majesty itself, and sometimes a hint which is taken. There is an air of freedom, even in their advertising columns, which speaks well for England to a foreigner. On the days when I arrived in London in 1847, I read among the daily announcements one offering a reward of £50 to any person who would put a nobleman, described by name and title, late a member of Parliament, into any country jail in England, he having been convicted of obtaining money under false pretenses. Was never such arrogancy as the tone of this paper. Every slip of an Oxonian or Cantabrigan who writes his first leader assumes that we subdued the earth before we sat on to write this particular Times. One would think the world was on its knees to Times office for its daily breakfast, but this arrogance is calculated. Who would care for it if it, quote, surmised, end quote, or, quote, dared to confess, end quote, or, quote, ventured to predict, end quote, etc. No, it is so, and so it shall be. The morality and patriotism of the Times claim only to be representative, and by no means ideal. It gives the argument not the majority, but the commanding class. Its editors know better than to defend Russia or Austria or English vested rights on abstract grounds, but they give a voice to the class who at the moment take the lead, and they have an instinct of finding where the power now lies, which is eternally shifting its banks, sympathizing with and speaking for the class that rules the hour, and being apprised of every ground swell, every Chartist resolution, every church squabble, every strike in the mills. They detect the first tremblings of change. They watch the hard and bitter struggles of the authors of each liberal movement year by year, watching them only to taunt and obstruct them until at last, when they see that these have established their fact, that power is on the point of passing to them, a strike in which the voice of a monarch astonish those whom they succor as much as those whom they desert, and make history sure. Of course, the aspirations see that. The Times is one of the goods of fortune, not to be won but by winning their cause. Punch is equally an expression of English good sense as the London Times. It is a comic version of the same sense. Many of its caricatures are equal to the best pamphlets and will convey to the eye in an instant the popular view which was taken of each turn in public affairs. Its sketches are usually made by masterly hands, and sometimes with genius, the delight of every class, because uniformity, guided by that taste which is tyrannical in England. It is a new trait of the 19th century that the wit and humour of England, as in Punch, so in the humorous, Gerald Dickens, Thackeray Hood, have taken the direction of humanity and freedom. Times, like every important institution, shows the way to a better. It is a living index of the colossal British power. Its existence honors the people who dare to print all they know, dare to know all the facts, and do not wish to be flattered by hiding the extent of the public disaster. There is always safety in valor. I wish I could add that this journal aspired to deserve the power it wields by guidance of the public sentiment to the right. It is usually pretended in Parliament and elsewhere that the English press has a high tone, which it has not. It has an imperial tone, as of a powerful and independent nation, but as with other empires, its tone is prone to be official and even official. To be official and even official. The Times shares all the limitations of the governing classes and wishes never to be in a minority. If only it dared to cleave to the right, to show the right to be the only expedient and feed its batteries from the central heart of humanity, it might not have so many men of rank among its contributors, but genius would be its cordial and invincible ally. It might now and then bear the brunt of formidable combinations, but no journal is ruined by wise courage. It would be the natural leader of the British reform. Its proud function had it being the voice of Europe, the defender of the exile, and patriot against despots, would be more effectually discharged. It would have the authority which is claimed for the dream of good men, not yet come to pass. An international congress, and the least of its victories, would be to give to England a new millennium of the beneficent power. Chapter 16. Stonehenge. It had been agreed between my friend Mr. Carlyle and me that before I left England we should make an excursion together to Stonehenge, which neither of us had seen, and the project pleased my fancy, with a double attraction of the monument and the companion. It seemed a bringing together of extreme points to visit the oldest religious monument in Britain, in company with her latest thinker, and one whose influence may be traced in every contemporary book. I was glad to sum up a little my experiences and exchange a few reasonable words on the aspects of England with a man on whose genius I set on very high value, and who had as much penetration and as severe a theory of duty as any person in it. On Friday, 7th July, we took the South Western Railway through Hampshire to Salisbury. We found a carriage to convey us to Amesbury. Fine weather, and my friend's local knowledge of Hampshire, in which he is wont to spend a part of every summer, made their way short. There was much to say, too, of the veiling Americans and their usual objects in London. I thought it natural that they should give some time to work of an art collected here, which they cannot find a home, and a little to scientific clubs and museums, which at this moment make London very attractive. But my philosopher was not contented. Art, and high art, is a favorite target for his wit. Quote, yes, Kunst is a great delusion, and Goethe and Schiller wasted a great deal of good time on it, end quote. And he thinks he discovered that old Goethe found this out, and in his later writings changed his tone. As soon as men begin to talk of art, architecture, and antiquities, nothing good comes of it. He wishes to go through the British Museum in silence, and thinks a sincere man will see something and say nothing. In these days, he thought it would become an architect to consult only the grim necessity, and say, I can build you a coffin for such dead persons as you are, and for such dead purposes as you have, but you shall have no ornament. For the science, he had, if possible, even less tolerance, and compared the servants of Summerest House to the boy who asked Confucius, quote, how many stars in the sky? End quote. Confucius replied, quote, he minded things near him, end quote. Then said the boy, quote, how many hairs are there in your eyebrows? End quote. Confucius said, quote, he didn't know and didn't care, end quote. Still speaking of the Americans, Carlyle complained that they disliked the coldness and exclusiveness of the English and run away to France and go with their countrymen and are amused, instead of manfully staying in London and confronting Englishmen and acquiring the culture who really have much to teach them. I told Carlyle that I was easily dazzled and was accustomed to concede readily all that an Englishman would ask. I saw everywhere in the country proofs of sense and spirit and success of every sort. I like the people. They are as good as they are handsome. They have everything and can do everything. But meantime, I surely know that as soon as I return to Massachusetts, I shall lapse at once into the feeling which the geography of America inevitably inspires, that we play the game with immense advantage, that there and not here is the seat and center of the British race, and that no skill or activity can long compete with the prodigious natural advantage of that country. In the hands of the same race, and that England, an old and exhausted island, must one day be contented, like other parents, to be strong only in her children. But this was a proposition which no Englishman of whatever condition can easily entertain. We left the train at Salisbury and took a carriage to Amesbury, passing by Old Sarum, a bare treeless hill, once containing the town which sent 2 members to Parliament. Now a hut, and arriving at Amesbury, stopped at the George Inn. After dinner, we walked to Salisbury Plain. On the broad downs, under the great sky, not a house was visible, nothing but Stonehenge, which looked like a group of brown dwarfs in the wide expanse. Stonehenge and the barrows whose rose like green bosses about the plain, and a few hayricks. On the top of a mountain, the old temple would not be more impressive. Far and wide, a few shepherds with their flocks sprinkled the plain, and bagmen drove along the road. It looked as if the wide margin given in this crowded aisle to the primeval temple were recorded by the veneration of the British race to the old egg out of which all their ecclesiastical structure and history have proceeded. Stonehenge is a circular colonnade with a diameter of 100 feet and enclosing a second and a third colonnade within. We walked round the stones and clambered over them to wound ourselves with their strange aspect and groupings, and found a nook sheltered from the wind among them, where Carlyle lighted his cigar. It was pleasant to see that just the simplest of all simple structures, 2 upright stones and a lintel laid across, had long outstood all later churches in all history, and were like what is most permanent on the face of the planet. These and the barrows were mounds, of which there are 160 within a circle of 3 miles about Stonehenge, like the same mound on the plain of Troy, which still makes good to the passing mariner on Hellespont the vaunt of Homer and the fame of Achilles. Within the enclosure grow buttercups, nettles, and all ground, with thyme, daisy, meadowsweet, goldenrod, thistle, and the carpeting grass. Over us larks were soaring and singing. As my friend said, quote, the larks, which were hatched last year, and the wind, which was hatched many thousand years ago, quote, we counted and measured by paces the biggest stones, and soon knew as much as any man can suddenly know of inscrutable temple. There are 94 stones, and there were once probably 160. The temple is circular and covered, and the situation fixed astronomically. The grand entrances here and of Aubrey being placed exactly northeast, quote, as all the gates of the old cavern temples are, end quote. How came the stones here? For these Saracens or judicial sandstones are not found in this neighborhood. The sacrificial stone, as it is called, is the only one in all these blocks that can resist the action of fire, as I read in the books, must have been brought 150 miles. On almost every stone we found the marks of the mineralogist's hammer and chisel. The smaller stones of the inner circle are of granite. I, who had just come from Professor Sedgwick's Cambridge Museum of Megatheria, amassed Odins, was ready to maintain that some clever elephants or Mylodonta had borne off and laid these rocks one on another. Only the good beasts must have known how to cut a well-wrought tenon and mortise, and to smooth the surface of some of the stones. The chief mystery is that any mystery should have been allowed to settle on so remarkable a monument. It is a country in which all the muses have kept their eyes now for 1800 years. We are not yet too late to learn much more than is known of the structure. Some diligent fellows of Layard will arrive stone by stone at the whole history by that exhaustive British sense and perseverance, so whimsical in its choice of objects, which leaves its own Stonehenge or choir to the rabbits, which it opens pyramids and uncovers Nineveh. Stonehenge, in virtue of the simplicity of its plan and its good preservation, is as if new and recent, and 1,000 years hence men will thank this age for the accurate history. We walked in and out and took again and again a fresh look at the uncanny stones. The old Sphinx put our petty differences of nationality out of sight. To these conscious stones, we two pilgrims were alike, known and near. We could equally well retrieve their old British meaning. My philosopher was subdued and gentle in the subject. In this quiet house of destiny, he happens to say, quote, I plant cypresses wherever I go, and if I am in search of pain, I cannot go wrong. End quote. The spot, the grey blocks, and their rude order, which refuses to be disposed of, suggests to him the flight of ages and the succession of religions. The old times of England impress Carlyle much. He reads like he says, in these last years, but Acta Sanctorum, the 53 columns of which are in the London Library, he finds all English history therein. He can see as he reads the old saint of Iona, sitting there and writing a man to men. The Acta Sanctorum show plainly that the men of those times believed in God and the immortality of the soul, as their abbeys and cathedrals testify. Now even the Puritanism is all gone. London is a pagan. He fancied that greater men had lived in England than any of her writers, and in fact about time when those writers appeared, the last of these were already gone. We left the mound in the twilight with the design to return the next morning, and coming back 2 miles to our inn, we were met by little showers, and late as it was, men and women were out attempting to protect their spread windows. The grass grows rank and dark in the showery England. At the inn, there was only milk for 1 cup of tea. When we called for more, the girl brought up 3 drops. My friend was annoyed. Who stood for the credit of an English inn? And still more the next morning, by the door cart, sole procurable vehicle in which we were to be sent to Wilton, I engaged a local antiquary, Mr. Brown, to go with us to Stonehenge on our way and show us that he knew of the quote astronomical end quote and quote sacrificial end quote stones. I stood on the last, and he pointed to the upright or rather inclined stone, called the quote astronomical end quote, and bade me notice that its top ranged with the sky line. Quote yes end quote. Very well. Now at the summer solstice, the sun rises exactly over the top of that stone, and at the judicial temple at Orbury, there is also an astronomical stone, in the same relative position. In the silence of tradition, this one relation to science becomes an important clue. But we were content to leave the problem with the rocks. Was this the, quote, giants' dance, end quote, which Merlin brought from Calarius, an island, to the Arthur Pendragon's monument to the British nobles whom Hengist slaughtered here? As Geoffrey of Monmouth relates, or was it a Roman work, as Indigo Jones explained to King James, or identical in design and style with the East Indian temples of the sun, as Davies in the Celtic researches maintains? Of all the writers, Stuckley is the best. The heroic antiquary, charmed with the geometric perfection of his ruin, connects it with the oldest monuments and religion of the world, and with the courage of his tribe does not stick to say, quote, the deity who made the world by the scheme of Stonehenge, end quote. He finds that the curses on Salisbury Plain stretches across the downs like a line of latitude upon the globe, and the meridian line of Stonehenge passes exactly through the middle of the curses. But here is the high point of the theory. The Druids had the magnet, laid their courses by it. Their cardinal points to Stonehenge, Ambersery, and elsewhere, which was a little from true east and west, followed the variations of the compass. The Druids were Phoenicians. The name of the magnet in Lapis Hercules, and Hercules was the god of the Phoenicians. Hercules, as a legend, drew his bow at the sun, and the sun god gave him a golden cup with which he sailed over the ocean. What was this but a compass box? This cup, or little boat, in which the magnet was made to float on water and to show the north, was probably its first form before it was suspended on a pin. Besides, was an arcanum, and as Britain was a Phoenician secret, so they kept their compass a secret, and it was lost with the Tyrian converse. The golden fleece again of Jason was the compass, a bit of lodestone, easily supposed by the only one in the world, and therefore naturally awakening the cupidity and ambition of the young heroes of a maritime nation to join an expedition to obtain possessor. If this wise stone. Hence the fable that the ship Argo was loquacious and oracular. There is also some curious coincidence in the names. Apollodorus makes Maginus the son of Aeolus, who married Neus. On hints like these, Stuckley builds again the grand colonnade into historic harmony, and computing backward by the known variations of the compass, bravely assigns the year 466 before Christ for the date of the temple. For the difficulty of handling and carrying stones of this size, the like is done in all sizes every day with no other aid than horsepower. I chanced to see a year ago men at work on the substructure of a house in Bowdoin Square in Boston, swinging a block of granite of the size of the largest of the Stonehenge columns. With an ordinary derrick, the men were common masons with paddies to help, nor did they think they were doing anything remarkable. I suppose there was a good man 1,000 years ago. I suppose there were as good men 1,000 years ago, and we wondered how Stonehenge was built and forgotten. After spending half an hour on the spot, we set forth in our door-cart over the downs of Wilton, Carlyle now suppressing some threats and evil omens on the proprietors for keeping these broad plains a wretched sheepwalk where so many thousands of Englishmen were hungry and wanted labor. But I heard afterwards that it is not an economy to cultivate this land, which only yields one crop on being broken up, and it is then spoiled. We came to Wilton and to Walton Hall, the renowned seat of the Earls of Pembroke, a house known to Shakespeare and Messenger, the frequent home of Sir Philip Sidney, where he wrote the Arcadia, where he conversed with Lord Brooke, a man of deep thought and a poet who caused to be engraved on his tombstone. Quote, here lies Fulk Greville, Lord Brooke, the friend of Sir Philip Sidney. End quote. It is now the property of the Earl of Pembroke and the residence of his brother Sidney Herbert, Esq, and is esteemed a noble specimen of the English manor hall. My friend had a letter from Mr. Herbert to his housekeeper, and the house was shown. The state drawing room is a double cube 30 feet high by 30 feet wide by 60 feet long. The adjoining room is a single cube of 30 feet every way. Although these apartments and the long library were full of good family portraits, Van Dyck's and other, and thoughts, there were some good pictures and a quadrangle cloister full of antique and modern statuary, to which Carlyle, catalogue in hand, did all too much justice. Yet the eye was still drawn to the windows, to a magnificent lawn on which grew the finest cedars in England. I had not seen more charming grounds. We went out and walked over the estate. We crossed a bridge built by Inigo Jones over a stream of which the gardener did not know the name. Cool Alf. I watched the deer climb to the lonely sculptured summer house on a hill backed by a wood, came down into the Italian garden and into a French pavilion, garnished with French busts, and so again to the house where we found a table laid for us with bread, meats, peaches, grapes, and wine. On leaving Wilton House, we took the coach for Salisbury. The cathedral, which was finished 600 years ago, has even a spruce and modern air, and its spire is the highest in England. I know not why, but I had been more struck with one of no fame at Coventry, which rises 300 feet from the ground, with lightness of a mullein plant, and not at all implicated with the church. Salisbury is now seen the culmination of the Gothic art in England, as the buttresses are fully unmasked and honestly detailed from the sides of the pile. The interior of the cathedral is obstructed by the organs in the middle, acting like a screen. I know now why in real architecture the hunger of the eye for length of line is so rarely gratified. The rule of art is that a colonnade is more beautiful than the longer it is, and that adds infinitum. And the nave of a church is seldom so long that it need be divided by a screen. We loitered in the church outside the choir while service was said. Whilst we listened to the organ, my friend remarked the music is good, and yet not quite religious, but somewhat as if a monk were panting to some fine queen of heaven. Carlyle was unwilling, as we did not ask to have the choir shown us, but returned to our inn after seeing another old church of the place. We passed in the train Clarendon Park, but could see little but the edge of a wood, though Carlyle had wished to pay closer attention to the birthplace of the decrees of Clarendon. At Bishopstoke we stopped and found Mr. H. received in his carriage and took us to his house at Bishop's Walton. On Sunday we had much discourse. On a very rainy day, my friends asked whether there were any Americans, any with an American idea, any theory of the right future of that country. Thus challenged, I bethought myself neither of caucuses nor Congress, neither of presidents nor of cabinet ministers, nor of such as would make of America another Europe. I thought only of the simplest and purest minds. I said, quote, certainly yes, for those who hold it are fantasies of a dream, which I should hardly care to relate to your English ears, to which it might be only ridiculous, and yet it is the only true. End quote. So I opened the dogma of no government and no residence and non-residence, and anticipated the objections and the fun, and procured a kind of hearing for it. I said it is true that I have never seen in any country a man of sufficient valor to stand for his truth. And yet it is plain to me that no less valor than this can command my respect. I can easily see the bankruptcy of the vulgar musket worship. Though great men be musket worshippers, and it is certain as God liveth, the gun that does not need another gun, the law of love and justice alone can effect a clean revolution. I fancy that one or two of my anecdotes made some impression on Carlyle, and I insisted that the manifest absurdity of the view to English visibility could make no difference to a gentleman. That as to our secure tenure of our mutton chop and spinach in London or in Boston, the soul might quote Talleyrand, quote, Monsieur je n'en vois pas la nécessité, end quote. As I had thus taken in the conversation, the saint's part when dinner was announced, Carlyle refused to go out before me. Quote, he was altogether too wicked, end quote. I planted my back against the wall, and our host wittily rescued us from the dilemma by saying he was the wickedest and would walk out first. Then Carlyle followed, and I went last. On the way to Winchester, whither our hosts accompanied us in the afternoon, my friends asked many questions respecting American landscapes, forests, house. My house, for example, it is not easy to answer these queries. Well, there, I thought, in American lies nature sleeping, overgrowing, almost conscious, too much by half for man in the picture, and so giving a certain trizities like the rank vegetation of swamps and forests seen at night steeped in dews and rains, which it loves, and on it man seems not able to make much impression. There, in that green Slavian continent, and high Alleghany pastures, and the sea-wide, sky-skirted prairie, still sleeps and murmurs and hides the great mother, long since driven away from the trim hedge rows and our cultivated garden of England. And in England, I am quite too sensible of this. Every one is on his good behavior and must be dressed for dinner at 6. So I put off my friends with very inadequate details as best I could. Just before entering Winchester, we stopped at the Church of St. Cross, and after looking through the quaint antiquity, we demanded a piece of bread and a jar of beer, which the founder, Henry de Blois, 1136, commanded should be given to every one who should ask it at the gate. We had both from the old couple who take care of the church. Some 20 people every day, they said, make the same demand. The hospitality of 700 years standing did not hinder Carlyle from pronouncing a malediction of the priest who receives £1,000 a year. That was meant for the poor, and spends a pittance on the small beer and crumbs. In the cathedral, I was gratified at least by the ample dimensions. The length of line exceeds that of any other English church. Before 556 feet by 250 in breadth of transept, I think I prefer this church to all I have seen, except Westminster and York. Here was Cornet buried, and here Alfred the Great was crowned and buried, and here the Saxon kings and later his own church. William of Wykeham. It is very old. Part of the crypt into which we went down and saw the Saxon and Norman arches of the old church on which the present stands was built 14 or 1500 years ago. Sharon Turner, in his history of the Anglo-Saxon, says Alfred was buried at Winchester, in the abbey he had found there. But his remains were removed by Henry I to the new abbey in the meadows of Hyde on the northern quarter of the city and laid under the high altar. The building was destroyed at the Reformation, and what is left of Alfred's body now lies covered by modern buildings or buried in the ruins of the old. Quote, William of Wykeham's shrine tomb was unlocked for us, and Carlyle took hold of the recumbent statue's marble hands and patted them affectionately, for he rightly values the brave men who built Windsor and this cathedral, and the school here and new college at Oxford. But it was growing late in the afternoon. Slowly we left the old house and parting with our host, we took the train for London. Chapter 17. Personal. In these comments, an old journey, the now revised after 7 busy years, have much changed men and things in England. I have abstained from reference to persons, except in the last chapter, and in 1 or 2 cases where the fame of the parties seemed to have given the public a property in all that concerned them. I must further allow myself a few notices, if only as an acknowledgment of debts that cannot be paid. My journeys were cheered by so much kindness from new friends that my impression of the island is bright with agreeable memories, both of public societies and households, and what is nowhere better found than in England, a cultivated person, fitly surrounded by a happy home with, quote, honor, love, obedience, troops of friends, end quote, is of all instructions the best. At the landing in Liverpool, I found my Manchester correspondent awaiting me, a gentleman whose kind reception was followed by a train of friendly and effective attentions, which never rested whilst I remained in the country. A man of sense and of letters, the editor of a powerful local journal, he added solid virtues and infinite sweetness and bonhomie. There seemed a pool of honey about his heart, which lubricated all his speech and action with fine jets of med. An equal good fortune attended many later accidents of my journey, until the sincerity of English kindness ceased to surprise. My visit fell in the fortunate days when Mr. Bancroft was the American minister in London, and at his house, or through his good offices, I had easy access to excellent persons and to privileged places. At the house of Mr. Carlyle, I met persons eminent in society and in letters. The privileges of the Athenaeum and of the Reform Clubs were hospitably open to me, and I found much advantage in the circles of the, quote, geologic, end quote, the, quote, antiquarian, end quote, and the, quote, royal, end quote, societies. Every day in London gave me new opportunities of meeting men and women who give splendor to society. I saw Rogers, Hallam, Macaulay, Milnes, Millman, Barry, Cornwall, Dickens, Thackeray, Tennyson, Leigh Hunt, Disraeli, Helps, Wilkinson, Bailey, Kenyon, and Forster, the young poets Clow, Arnold, and Patmore, and among the men of science, Robert Brown, Owen Sedgwick, Faraday Buckland, Lyle de la Blanche, Hooker Carpenter, Babbage, and Edward Forbes. It was my privilege also to converse with Miss Bellary, with Lady Morgan, and Mrs. Jameson, and Mrs. Somerville. A finer hospitality made many private houses not less known and dear. It is not in distinguished circles that wisdom and elevated characters are usually found. Or if found, they are not confined thereto. And my recollections of the best hours go back to private conversations in different parts of the kingdom, with persons little known, nor am I insensible to the courtesy which frankly opened to me some noble mansions. If I do not adorn my page with their names, among the privileges of London, I recall with pleasure 2 or 3 signal days, one at Kew, where Sir William Hooker showed me all the riches of the vast botanic garden, one at the museum, where Sir Charles Fellows explained in detail the history of his Ionic trophy monument, and still another, on which Mr. Owen accompanied my countryman, Mr. H. and myself through the Hunterian Museum. The like frank hospitality bent on real service I found among the great and the humble, wherever I went, in Birmingham and Oxford, in Leicester, in Nottingham, in Sheffield, in Manchester, in Liverpool, at Edinburgh, through the kindness of Dr. Samuel Brown, I made the acquaintance of De Quincey and Lord Geoffrey, of Wilson, of Mrs. Crowley, of the Messrs. Chambers, and of a man of high character and genius, the short-lived painter David Scott. At Ambleside, in March 1848, I was for a couple of days the guest of Miss Martineau, then newly returned from her Egyptian tour. On Sunday afternoon, I accompanied her to Rydalmount, and as I have recorded a visit to Wordsworth many years before, I must not forget this second interview. We found Mr. Wordsworth asleep on the sofa. He was at first silent and indisposed, as an old man suddenly waked before he had ended his nap, but soon became full of talk of the French news. He was nationally bitter on the French, bitter on the Scotchmen, too. No Scotchman, he said, can write English. He detailed the two models, on one or the other, of which all the sentences of the historians Robertson are framed. Nor could Geoffrey, nor the Edinburgh reviewers write English, nor can, who is a pest to the English tongue. Incidentally, he added, Gibbon cannot write English. The Edinburgh Review wrote what would tell and what would sell. It had, however, changed the tone of its literary criticism from the time when a certain letter was written to the editor by Coleridge. Mrs. W. had the editor's answer in her possession. Tennyson, he thinks, a ripe poetic genius, though with some affection he had thought an elder brother of Tennyson, at first the better poet, but must now reckon Alfred the true one. In speaking of I know not what style, he said, quote, to be sure, it was the manner, but then the matter always comes out of the manner, end quote. He thought Rio Janeiro the best place in the world for a great capital city. We talked of English national character. I told him it was not creditable that no one in all the country knew anything of Thomas Taylor, the Platonist, whilst in every American library his translations are found. I said, if Plato's Republic were published in England as a new book today, do you think it would find any readers? He confessed it would not. Quote, and yet, end quote, he added after a pause, with that complacency which never deserts a true-born Englishman, quote, and yet we have embodied it all, end quote. His opinions of French, English, Irish, and Scotch seemed rashly formulated from the little anecdotes of what had befallen himself and members of his family. In a diligence or stage coach, his face sometimes lighted up, but his conversation was not marked by special force or elevation. Yet perhaps it is a high compliment to the cultivation of the English generally when we find such a man not distinguished. He had a healthy look, with a weather-beaten face, his face corrugated, especially the large nose. Miss Martineau, who lived near him, praised him to me, not for his poetry, but for thrift and economy, for having afforded to his country neighbors an example of a modest household, where comfort and culture was secured without any display. She said that in his early housekeeping at the cottage where he first lived, he was accustomed to offer his friends bread and plainest fare. If they wanted anything more, they must pay him for their board. It was the rule of the house. I replied that it evinced English pluck more than any anecdote I knew. A gentleman in the neighborhood told the story of Walter Scott staying once for a week with Wordsworth, and slipping out every day under pretense of a walk to the Swan Inn for a cold cut and porter, and one day passing with Wordsworth the inn, he was betrayed by the landlord asking him if he had come for his porter. Of course, this trait would have another look in London, and there you will hear from the different literary men that Wordsworth had no personal friend, that he was not amiable, that he was parsimonious, etc. And though always generous, says that he never praised anybody. A gentleman in London showed me a watch that once belonged to Milton, whose initials are engraved on its face. He said he once showed this to Wordsworth, who took it in one hand, then drew out his own watch and held it up with the other before the company. But no one making the expected remark. He put back his own in silence. I do not attach more importance to the disparagement of Wordsworth among London scholars who reads him well will know that in following the strong bent of his genius, he was careless of the many, careless of the few, self-assured that he should, quote, create the taste by which he is to be enjoyed, unquote. He lived long enough to witness the revolution he had wrought, and to, quote, see what he foresaw, end quote. There are torpid places in his mind. There is something hard and sterile in his poetry. Want of grace and variety, want of Catholicity and cosmopolitan scope. He had conformities to English politics and traditions. He had egoistic puerilities in the choice and treatment of his subjects. But let us say of him that alone in his time he treated the human mind well, and with an absolute trust. His adherence to his poetic creed rested on real inspirations. The ode on immortality is the high water mark which the intellect has reached in this age. New means were employed and new realms added to the empire of the muse by his courage. Chapter 18. Result. England is the best of actual nations. It is no ideal framework. It is an old pile built in different ages, with repairs, additions, and makeshifts. But you see the poor best you have got. London is the epitome of our times and the Rome of today. Broad-fronted, broad-bottomed Teutons, they stand in solid phalanx, four square to the point of compass. They constitute the modern world. They have earned their vantage ground and held it through ages of adverse possession. They are well marked and differing from other leading races. England is tender-hearted. Rome was not. England is not so public in its bias. Private life is its place of honor. Truth in private life, untruth in public, marks these home-loving men. That political conduct is not decided by general views, but by internal intrigues and personal and family interests. They cannot readily see beyond England. The history of Rome and Greece, when written by their scholars, degenerates into English party pamphlets. They cannot see beyond England, nor in England can they transcend the interests of the governing class. Quote, English principles, end quote, meaning a primary regard to the interests of property. England, Scotland, and Ireland combine to check the colonies. England and Scotland combine to check Irish manufacturers and trade. England rallies at home to check Scotland. In England, the strong classes check the weaker. And the home population of near 30 millions, there are but 1 million voters. The church punishes dissent, punishes education. Down to a late day, marriages performed by dissenters were illegal. A bitter class legislation gives power to those who are rich enough to buy a law. The game laws are a proverb of oppression. Pauperism encrusts and clogs the state, and in hard times becomes hideous. In bad seasons, the porridge was diluted. Multitudes lived miserably by shellfish and seaweed. In cities, the children are trained to beg until they shall be old enough to rob. Men and women were convicted of poisoning scores of children for burial feasts. In Irish districts, men deteriorated in size and shape. The nose sunk, the gums were exposed, with diminished brain and brutal form. During the Australian emigration, multitudes were rejected by the commissioners as being too emaciated for useful colonists. During the Russian War, few of those that offered as recruits were found up to the medical standard, though it had been reduced. The foreign policy of England, though ambitious and lavish of money, has not often been generous or just. It has a principal regard. It has a principal regard to the interests of trade, checked, however, by the aristocratic bias of the ambassador, which usually puts him in sympathy with the continental courts. It sanctioned the partition of Poland. It betrayed Genoa. It betrayed Genoa, Sicily, Parma, Greece, Turkey, Rome, and Hungary. Some public regards they have. They have abolished slavery in the West Indies and put an end to human sacrifices in the East. At home, they have a certain statute hospitality. In England keeps open doors, as a trading country must, to all nations. It is one of their fixed ideas and wrathfully supported by their laws in unbroken sequence for 1,000 years. In Magna Carta, it was ordained that all, quote, merchants shall have safe and secure conduct to go out and come into England and to stay there, and to pass as well by land as by water, to buy and sell by the ancient allowed customs, without any evil toil, except in time of war, or when they shall be of any nation at war with us. End quote. It is a statute and obliged hospitality and peremptorily maintained by this. Shop rule had one magnificent effect. It extends its cold, unalterable courtesy to political exiles of every opinion, and is a fact which might give additional light to that portion of the planet seen from the farthest star. But this perfunctory hospitality puts no sweetness into their unaccommodating manners, no check on that puissant nationality which make their existence incompatible with all that is not English. What we must say about a nation is a superficial dealing with symptoms. We cannot go deep enough into the biography of the spirit who never throws himself into one hero, but delegates his energy and power to spasms to vicious and defective individuals. But the wealth of the source is seen in the plenitude of the English nature. What variety of power and talent, what facility and plenteousness of knighthood, lordship, ladyship, royalty, loyalty, what a proud chivalry is indicated in Collins' peerage, end quote. Quote, Collins's peerage, end quote. Through 800 years, what dignity resting on what reality and stoutness, what courage in war, what sinew in labor, what cunning workmen, what inventors and engineers, what seamen and pilots, what clerks and scholars. No one man, and no few men can represent them. It is a people of myriad personalities. Their many headedness is owning to the advantageous position of the middle class, who are always a source of letters and science. Hence the vast plenty of their aesthetic production, as they are many-headed, so they are many-nationed. The colonization annexes archipelagos and continents, and the speech seems destined to be the universal language of men. I have noted the reserve of power in the English temperament. In the island they never let out all the length of all the reins. There is no berserker rage, no abandonment or ecstasy of will or intellect, like that of the Arabs in the time of Mohammed, or like that which intoxicated France in 1789. But who would see the uncoiling of that tremendous spring, the explosion of the well-husbanded forces, must follow the swarms which, pouring now for 200 years from the British Islands, have sailed and rode and traded and planted through all climates, mainly following the belt of empire, the temperate zone, carrying the Saxon seed with its instinct for liberty and law, for arts and for thoughts, acquiring under some skies a more electric energy than the native ear allows. To the conquest of the globe, their colonial policy, obeying the necessities of a vast empire, has become liberal. Canada and Australia have been contented with substantial independence. They are expiating the wrongs of India by benefits. First, in works for the irrigation of the peninsula, the roads and telegraphs and Secondly, in the instruction of the people to qualify them for self-government when the British power shall be finally called home. Their mind is in a state of arrested development. A divine cripple like Vulcan, a blind savant like Huber and Sanderson, they do not occupy themselves on matters of general and lasting import, but on corporal civilization, on goods that perish in the using. But they read with good intent, and what they learn they incarnate. The English mind turns every abstraction it can receive into a portable utensil or a working institution. Such is their tenacity and such their practical turn that they hold all they gain. Hence we say that only the English race can be trusted with freedom, freedom which is double-edged and dangerous to any but the wise and robust. The English designate the kingdoms, emulous of free institutions, as the sentimental nations. Their culture is not an outside varnish, but is thorough and secular in families and the race. They are oppressive with their temperament, and all the more that they are refined. I have sometimes seen them walk with my countrymen, when I was forced to allow them every advantage, and their companions seemed bags of bones. There's cramped limitations in their habit of thought, sleepy routine, and a tortoise instinct to hold hard to the ground with his claws, lest he should be thrown in on his back. There is a drag of inertia which resists reform in every shape: law reform, army reform, extension of suffrage, Jewish franchise, Catholic emancipation, the abolition of slavery, or impressment, penal code and entails. They praise this drag under the formula that it is the excellence of the British Constitution, and no law can anticipate the public opinion. The poor tortoises must hold hard, for they feel no wings sprouting at their shoulders. Yet somewhat divine warms at their heart, and waits a happier hour. It hides in their sturdy will. Quote, will, end quote, said the old philosophy, quote, is the measure of power, end quote. And personality is the token of this race. Quid vult valdi vult. What they do with a will. You cannot account for their success by their Christianity, commerce, charter, common law, parliament, or letters, but by the contumacious, sharp-tongued English, but by the contumacious, sharp-tongued energy of English natural, with a poise impossible to disturb, which makes all these its instruments. They are slow and reticent, and are like a dull, good horse, which lets every nag pass him, but will whip and spur, will run down every racer in the field. They are right in their feeling, through the wrong in their speculation. The feudal system survives in the deep inequality of property and privilege, and the limited franchise in the social barriers which confine patronage and promotion to a caste, and still more in the submissive ideas pervading these people. The faging of the schools is repeated in the social classes, and the Englishman shows no mercy to those below him in the social scale, as he looks for none from those above him. Any forbearance from his superiors surprises him, and they suffer in his good opinion. But the feudal system can be seen with less pain on large historical grounds. It was pleaded in mitigation of the rotten borough that it worked well, that substantial justice was done. Fox, Berkeley, Pitt, Erskine, Wilberforce, Sheridan, Romilly, or whatever national men were by this means sent to Parliament, when the return by large constituents would have been doubtful. So now we say that the right measures of England are the men it bred, that it has yielded more able men in 500 years than any other nation. And though we must not play providence and balance the chances of producing 10 great men against a comfortable 10,000 mean men, yet retrospectively we may strike the balance and prefer one Alfred, one Shakespeare, one Milton, one Sidney, one Raleigh, one Wellington to a million foolish Democrats. The American system is more democratic, more humane, yet the American people do not yield better or more able men or more inventions or books or benefits than the English. Congress is not wiser or better than Parliament. France has abolished its suffocating old regime, but is not recently marked by any more wisdom or virtue. The power of performance has not been exceeded. The creation of value. The English have given importance to individuals, a principle and fruit of every society. Every man is allowed and encouraged to be what he is and is guarded in the indulgence of his whim. Quote, Magna Carta, end quote, said Rushworth. Quote, is such a fellow that he will have no sovereign, end quote. By this general activity and by the sacredness of individuals, they have in 700 years evolved the principles of freedom. It is the land of patriots, martyrs, sages, and bards, and if the ocean out of which it emerged should wash it away, it will be remembered as an island famous for immortal laws, for the announcement of original right which make the stone tables of liberty. Chapter 19. Speech at Manchester. A few days after my arrival at Manchester in November 1847, the Manchester Athenaeum gave its annual banquet in the Free Trade Hall. With other guests, I was invited to be present and to address the company. And looking over recently a newspaper report of my remarks, I inclined to reprint it as fitly expressing the feeling with which I entered England, and which agrees well enough with the more deliberate results of better acquaintance recorded in the foregoing pages. Sir Archibald Allison, the historian, presided and opened the meeting with a speech. He was followed by Mr. Cobden, Lord Brackley, and others, among whom was Mr. Cruikshank, one of the contributors to Punch. Mr. Dixon's letter of apology for his absence was read. Mr. Gerald, who had been announced, did not appear. On being introduced to the meeting, I said, Mr. Chairman and gentlemen, it is pleasant to meet. Mr. Chairman and gentlemen, it is pleasant to meet this great and brilliant company, and doubly pleasant to see the faces of so many distinguished persons on this platform. But I have known all these persons already. When I was at home, they was as near to me as they are. When I was at home, they were as near to me as they are to you. The arguments of the League and its leaders are known to all the friends of free trade. The gaieties and genius, the political, the social, the parietal wit of Punch go duly every fortnight to every boy and girl in Boston and New York. Sir, when I came to see, I found the history of Europe by Sir A. Allison on the ship's cabin table. The property of the captain, a sort of program or playbill, to tell the seafaring New Englander what he shall find on his landing here. And as for Dumby, sir, there is no land where paper exists to print on, where it is not found. No man who can read that does not read it, and if he cannot, he finds some charitable pair of eyes that can and hears it. But these things are not for me to say. These compliments, though true, would better come from one who felt and understood these merits more. I am not here to exchange civilities with you, but rather to speak of that which I am sure interests these gentlemen more than their own praises, of that which is good in holidays and working days, same in one century and in another century. That which lures a solitary American in the woods with the wise to see England is the moral peculiarity of the Saxon's race. It is commanding sense of right and wrong, the love and devotion to that. This is the imperial trait which arms them with the scepter of the globe. It is this which lies at the foundation of the aristocratic character, which certainly wanders into strange vagaries, so that its origin is often lost sight, but which, if it should lose this, would find itself paralyzed, and in trade and in the mechanic shop, gives that honesty in performance, that thoroughness and solidity of work, which is a national characteristic. The conscience is one element, and the other is that loyal adhesion. The habit of friendship, that homage of man to man running through all classes, the electing of worthy person to a certain fraternity to acts of kindness and warm and stanch support, from year to year, from youth to age, which is alike lovely and honourable to those who render and those who receive it, which stands in strong contrast with the superficial attachment of other races, their excessive courtesy and short-lived connection. You will think me very pedantic, gentlemen, but holiday though it be, I have not the smallest interest in any holiday except as it celebrates real and not pretended joys. And I think it just in this time of gloom and commercial disaster, of affliction and beggary in these districts, that on these very accounts I speak of, you should not fail to keep your literary anniversary. I seem to hear you say that for all that is come and gone yet, we will not reduce by one chaplet or one oak leaf the braveries of our annual feast. But I must tell you, I was given to understand in my childhood that the British island from which my forefathers came, with no lotus garden, no paradise of serene sky, and roses, and music, and merriment all the year round, no, but a cold, foggy, mournful country, where nothing grew well in the open air but robust men and virtuous women, and these of a wonderful fibre and endurance, that their best parts were slowly revealed, their virtues did not come out until they quarrelled, and they did not strike well the first time. Good lovers, good haters, and you could know little about them till you had seen them long, and little good of them till you had seen them in action, that in prosperity they were moody and dumpish, but in adversity they were grand. It is not true, sir, that the wise ancients did not praise the ship parting with flying colors from the port, but only that brave sailor which came back with torn sheets and battered sides, stripped of her banners, but having ridden out the storm. Let me reread that. But only that brave sailor which came back with torn sheets and battered sides, stripped of her banners, but having ridden out the storm. And so, gentlemen, I feel in regard to this aged England, with the possessions, honors, and trophies, and also with the infirmities of 1,000 years gathering around her, irretrievably, irretrievably committed as she now is to many old customs which cannot be suddenly changed, pressed upon by the transitions of trade and new and all incalculable modes, fabric arts, machines, and competing populations. I see her not dispirited, not weak, but well remembering that she has seen dark days before, indeed with a kind of instinct that she sees a little better in a cloudy day, and that in storm of battle and calamity she has a secret vigor and a pulse like a cannon. I see her in her old age, not decrepit, but young, still daring to believe in her power of endurance and expansion. Seeing this, I say, all hail, mother of nations, mother of heroes, strength still equal to the time, still wise to entertain, and swift to execute the policy which mind and heart of mankind requires in the present hour, and thus only hospitable to the foreigner, and truly a home to the thoughtful and generous who are born in this soil. So be it, so let it be. If it be not so, if the courage of England goes with the chances of a commercial crisis, I will go back to the capes of Massachusetts and my own Indian stream, and say to my countrymen, the old race are all gone, and the elasticity and hope of mankind must henceforth remain on the Allegheny, Allegheny range, Allegheny ranges, or nowhere. Conduct of life. Conduct of Life was published in 1860. Most of the material in this book had served as a course of lectures, first in Pittsburgh in 1851, later in Boston, and then the various places throughout the country. By this time, Emerson was well known everywhere in America and was in constant demand. He was traveling extensively in the East and in the Middle West, which was then a raw and growing part of the country. The period between his return from England in 1848 and the publication of this book in 1860 was full of great political unrest, and Emerson was unwillingly drawn into it. Conduct of Life was well received and sold rapidly. Selected for this volume are the essays, quote, Wealth, and quote, Culture, end quote. Wealth. Now, I'm going to have to make sure I do this right. It's either horizontal or vertical. We'll see how it goes. Wealth. Who shall tell what did befall? I think it's horizontal. Who shall tell what did befall in the safe herbal of the coal? Far away in time when once... It's a bit of a tricky one. Let's do it vertical, and then if that doesn't work, we'll go back to horizontal. I think it is vertical, actually, yeah. Who shall tell what did befall? Far away in time when once over the lifeless bowl hung idle stars and suns. What god the element obeyed? Wings of what wind the light bore, wafting the punny seeds of power, which lodged in a rock, the rock upbraid. And well the primal pioneer, known the strong task is to it assigned, patient through heaven's enormous year, to build a matter home for mind. Patient through heaven's enormous year, to build a matter home for mind. From ear creeping centuries drew the matter thicket low and wide. This must leave the leaves of ages strew, the granite slabs to clothe and hide. What can wave its golden pride? What smiths and in what furnace rolled in dizzy aeons dim and mute, the reeling brain and ill compute. Copper and iron, lead and gold, what oldest star the fame can save of races perishing to pave the planet with a floor of lime, thus is the pyramid and mole, who saw what ferns and palms were past under the tumbling mountain's breast. In the safe herbal of the coal, but when the quarried means were piled, all is waste and worthless, till arrives the wise selecting will, end of slime and chaos wit, draw the threads of fear and fit. Then temples rose in towns and marts, the shop of toil, the hall of arts. Then flew the sail across the seas to feed the north from tropic trees. The storm wind wove the torrent span. Where they were bid, the rivers ran. New slaves fulfilled the poet's dream. Galvanic wire, strong shouldered steam. Then decks were built and crops were stored, and ignots added to the board. But though light-headed men forget, remembering matter pays his debt, her debt? Still through her motes and masses draw electric thrills and ties of law, which bind the strengths of nature wild, to be to the conscious child. As soon as a stranger is introduced into any company, one of the first questions which all wish to have answered is, how does that man get his living? and with reason he is nowhere. And with reason he is no whole man until he knows how to earn a blameless livelihood. Society is barbarous until every industrious man can get his living without dishonest customs. Every man is a consumer and ought to be a producer. He fails to make his place good in the world unless he not only pays his debt but also adds something to the commonwealth. Nor can he do justice to his genius without making some larger demand on the world than he bears subsistence. He is by constitution expensive and need to be rich. Wealth has its source in applications of the mind to nature, from the rudest strokes of spade and axe up to the last secrets of art. Intimate ties subsist between thought and all production. Because a better order is equivalent to vast amounts of brute labor. The focus and the resistance are nature's, but the mind acts in bringing things from where they abound to where they are wanted, and wise combining and directing the practice of the useful arts and in the searching of finer values by fine art, by eloquence, by song, or the reproductions of memory. Wealth is in applications of mind to nature, and the art of getting rich consists not in industry, much less in saving, but in a better order and timeliness, and being at the right spot. One man has stronger arms or longer legs, another sees by the course of streams and growth of markets where land will be wanted, makes a clearing to the river, goes to sleep and wakes up rich. Steam is no stronger now than it was 100 years ago, but it is put to better use. A clever fellow was acquainted with the expansive force of steam. He also saw the wealth of wheat and grass rotting in Michigan. Then he cunningly screws on the steam pipe to the wheat crop. Then he cunningly screws to the steam pipe to the wheat crop. Puff! Now, oh steam! Steam puffs and expands as before, but this time it is dragging all Michigan at its back to hungry New York. The steam puffs and expands as before, but this time it is dragging all Michigan at its back to hungry New York and hungry England. Coal lay in ledges under the ground since the flood until a laborer with pick and windlass brings it to the surface. We may well call it black diamonds. Every basket is power and civilization. For coal is a portable climate. It carries the heat of the tropics to Labrador and the polar circle, and it is the means of transporting itself with her soever it is wanted. Watt and Stephenson whispered in the ear of mankind their secret, that a half ounce of coal draw 2 tons of a mile, and coal carries coal by rail and by boat to make Canada as warm as Calcutta, and with its comfort brings its industrial power. When the farmer's peaches are taken from under the tree until When the farmer's peaches are taken from under the tree and carried into town, they have a new look and a 100-fold value over the fruit which grew on the same bough and lies fulsomely on the ground. The craft of the merchant is this bringing a thing from where it bounds to where it is costly. Wealth begins in a tight roof that keeps the rain and wind out, and a good pump that yields you plenty of sweet water, and 2 suits of clothes so to change your dress when you are wet, and dry sticks to burn in a good double wick lamp, and 3 meals, and a horse or a locomotive to cross the land, and a boat to cross the sea, and tools to work with, and books to read, and so in giving on all sides by tools and auxiliaries the greatest possible extension to our powers. as if it added feet and hands and eyes and blood, length to the day, and knowledge and goodwill. Wealth begins with these articles of necessity. And here we must recite the iron law which nature thunders in these northern climates. First, she requires that each man should feed himself. If haply his fathers have left him no inheritance, he must go to work, and by making his wants less or his gains more, he must draw himself out of that state of pain and insult in which she forces the beggar to lie. She gives him no rest until this is done. She starves, taunts, and torments him, takes away warmth, laughter, sleep, friends, and daylight, until he has fought his way to his own loaf. Then, less peremptorily, but still with sting enough, she urges him to the acquisition of such things as belong to him. Every warehouse and shop window, every fruit tree, every thought of every hour opens a new want to him, which it concerns his power and dignity to gratify. It is of no use to argue the wants down. The philosophers have laid the greatness of man in making his wants few. But will a man content himself with a hut and a handful of dried peas? He is born to be rich, he is thoroughly related, and is tempted out by his appetites and fancies to the conquest of this and that piece of nature, until he finds his well-being in the use of his planet, and of more planets than his own. Wealth requires, besides the crust of bread and the roof, the freedom of the city, the freedom of the earth, traveling machinery, the benefits of science, music, fine arts, the best culture and the best company. He is the rich man who can avail himself of all men's faculties. He is the richest man who knows how to draw a benefit from the labors of the greatest numbers of men in distant countries and in past times. The same correspondence that is between thirst in the stomach and water in the spring exists between the whole of man and the whole of nature. The elements offer their service to him. The sea washing, the equator, and the poles offers his powerless aid, and the power and empire that follow it, day by day, to his craft and audacity. Quote, beware of me, end quote, it says. Quote, but if you can hold me, I am the key to all the lands, end quote. Fire offers on its side an equal power. Fire, steam, lighting, gravity, ledges of rock, mines of iron, leak, quicksilver, tin, and gold, forests of all woods, fruits of all climates, animals of all habits, the powers of tillage, the fabrics of his chemic laboratory, the webs of his loom, the masculine drought of his locomotive, the talisman of the machine shop, all grand and subtle things, minerals, gases, ethers, passions, war, trade, government, are his natural playmates, and according to the excellence of the machinery in each human being is his attraction to the instruments he is to employ. The world is his tool chest, and he is successful of his faculties with nature or the degree in which he takes up things into himself. The strong race is strong on these terms. The Saxons are the merchants of the world now for 1,000 years, the leading race, and by nothing more than their quality of personal independence, and in its special modification, pecuniary independence, no lines for bread and games on the government, no clanship, no patriarchal style of living by the revenues of a chief, no marrying on, no system of clientship suits them, but every man must pay his scot. The English are prosperous and peaceable, with the habit of considering that every man must take care of himself and has himself to thank if he do not maintain and improve his position in society. The subject of economy mixes itself with morals inasmuch as it is a peremptory point of virtue that a man's independence be secured. Poverty demoralizes. A man in debt is for a slave. A man in debt is for a slave. And Wall Street thinks it easy. And Wall Street thinks it easy for a millionaire to be a man of his word. and man of honor, but that in full but that in failing circumstances no man can be relied on to keep his integrity. And when one observes in the hotels and palaces of our Atlantic capitals the habit of expense, the riot of the senses, the absence of bonds, clanship, fellow feeling of any kind, he feels that when a man or woman is driven to the wall, the chances of integrity are frighteningly diminished, as if virtue were coming to be a luxury which few could afford, or as Burke said, quote, at a market almost too high for humanity, unquote, he may fix his inventory of necessities and of enjoyments on what scale he pleases. But if he wishes the power and privilege of thought, the choking out his own career and having society on his own terms, he must bring his wants within his proper power to satisfy. The manly part is to do with might and main, what you can do. The world is full of fops who never did anything and who had persuaded beauties and men of genius to wear their fop livery. And these will deliver the fop opinion that it is not respectable to be seen earning a living, that it is much more respectable to spend without earning, and this doctrine of the snake will come also from the elect sons of light. For wise men are not wise at all hours, and will speak 5 times from their tastes or their humor, 2 once from the reason. The brave workman who might betray his feeling of it in his manners, if he do not succumb in his practice, must replace the grace or elegance fulfilled by the merit of the work done. No matter whether he makes shoes or statues or laws, it is the privilege of any human work which is well done to invest the doer with a certain haughtiness. He can well afford not to conciliate whose faithful work will answer for him. The mechanic at his bench carries a quiet heart and assured manners and deals on even terms with men of any condition. The artist has made his picture so true that it disconcerts criticism. The statue is so beautiful that it contracts no stain from the market, but makes the market a silent gallery for itself. The case of the young lawyer was pitiful to discuss. A paltry matter of buttons or tweezer cases, perhaps, but the determined youth saw in it an aperture to insert his dangerous wedges, made the insignificance of the thing forgotten, and gave fame by a sense and energy to the name and affairs of the Tilton snuff-box factory. Society in large towns is babyish, and wealth is made a toy. The life of pleasure is so ostentatious that a shallow observer must believe that this is the agreed best use of wealth. And whatever is pretended, it ends in corsetting. But if this were the main use of surplus capital, it would bring us to barricades, burnt towns, and tomahawks. Presently, men of sense esteem wealth to be the assimilation of nature to themselves. The converting of the sap and juices of the planet is the incarnation and nurturement of the design. Power is what they want, not candy. Power to execute their design, power to give legs and feet, form an actuality to their thought, which to a clear-sighted man appears the end for which the universe exists, and all its resources might be well applied. Columbus thinks that the sphere is a problem for practical navigation as well as for closet geometry, and looks on all kings and peoples as cowardly landsmen until they dare fit him out. Few men on the planet have more truly belonged to it, but he was forced to leave much of his map blank. His successors inherited his map and inherited his fury to complete. So the men of the mine, telegraph, mill, map, and survey, the maniacs who took up the project in marts and offices and entreat men to subscribe. How did our factories get built? How did North America get netted with iron rails except by the importunity of these orators who dragged all the prudent men in? Is party the madness of many for the gain of a few? This speculative genius is the madness of a few for the gain of the world. These projectors are sacrificed, but the public is the gainer. Each of these idealists, working after his thought, would make it tyrannical if he could. He is met and antagonized by other speculators as hot as he. The equilibrium is preserved by these counteractions. As one tree keeps down another in the forest, that it may not absorb all the sap in the ground, and the supply in nature of railroad presidents, copper miners, grand junctioners, smoke burners, fire annihilators, etc., is limited by the same law which keeps the proportion in the supply of carbon, of alum, and of hydrogen. To be rich is to have a ticket of admission to the masterworks and chief men of each race. It is to have the sea by voyaging to visit the mountains, Niagara, the Nile, the desert, Rome, Paris, Constantinople, to see galleries, libraries, arsenals, manufactories. The reader of Humboldt's Cosmos follows the marches of a man whose eyes, ears, and mind are armed by all the sciences, arts, and implements which mankind have anywhere accumulated, and who is using these to add to the stock. So it is with Dinan, Beckford, Belzoni, Wilkinson, Layard Kane, Lepsius, and Livingstone. Quote, the rich man, end quote, says Saidi, quote, is everywhere, expected and at home, end quote. The rich take up something more of the world into man's life. They include the country as well as the town, the ocean side, the wide hills, the far east, and the old European homesteads of man, and the notion of available material. The world is his who has money to go over it. He arrives at the seashore, and a sumptuous ship is floored and coppered for him the stormy Atlantic, and made it a luxurious hotel in the horrors of tempests. The Persians say, quote, it is the same to him who wears a shoe as if the whole earth were covered with leather. End quote. Kings are said to have long arms, but every man should have long arms, and should pluck his living, his instruments, his power, and his knowing from the sun, moon, and stars. Is not then the demand to be rich legitimate? Yet I have never seen a rich man, I have never seen a man as rich as all men ought to be, or with an adequate command of nature. The pulpit and the press have many commonplaces denouncing the thirst for wealth. But if men should take these moralists at their word and leave off aiming to the rich, the moralists would rush to rekindle at all hazards this love of power in the people. Lest civilization should be undone, men are urged by their ideas to acquire the command over nature. Ages derive a culture from the wealth of Roman Caesars. Leo X, magnificent kings of France, grand dukes of Tuscany, dukes of Devonshire, Townleys, Vernons, and Peels in England, or whatever great proprietors, it is the interest of all men that there should be Vaticans and Louvres full of noble works of art, British museums and French gardens of plants, Philadelphia academies of natural history, Bodleian, Ambrosian royal congressional libraries. It is the interest of all that there should be exploring expeditions, Captain Cooks to voyage round the world, Roses, Franklins, Richardsons, and Kanes to find the magnetic and the geographic poles. We are all richer for the measurement of a degree of latitude on the Earth's surface. Our navigation is safer for the chart. How intimately our knowledge of the system of the universe rests on that. And a true economy in a state of or an individual will forget its frugality in behalf of claims like these, whilst it is each man's interest that not only ease and convenience of living, but also wealth of surplus surplus product should exist somewhere. It need not be in his hands. Often it is very undesirable to him. God said, well, quote, nobody should be rich but those who understand it, end quote. Some men are born to own and can animate all their possessions, others cannot. Their owning is not graceful. Their owning is not graceful. Seems to be a compromise of their character. They seem to steal their own dividends. They should own who can administer, not they who hoard and conceal. Not they who decree the greater proprietors they are only the greater beggars. But they whose work carves out work for more, opens a path for all. For he is the rich man in whom the people are rich, and he is the poor man in whom the poor people are poor. And how to give all across the masterpieces of art and nature is the problem of civilization. The socialism of our day has done good service in setting man or thinking how certain civilizing benefits, how only now only enjoyed by the opulent can be enjoyed by all. For example, the providing to each man the means and apparatus of science and of the arts. There are many articles good for occasional use, which few men are able to own. Every man wishes to see the ring of Saturn, the satellite belts of Jupiter and Mars, the mountains and craters in the moon. Yet how few can buy a telescope, and of those scarcely one would like the trouble of keeping it in order and exhibiting it. So of electrical and chemical apparatus and many the like things, every man may have occasion to consult books which he does not care to possess, such as encyclopedias, dictionaries, tables, charts, maps, and other public documents, pictures also of birds, beasts, fishes, shells, trees, flowers, whose names he desires to know. There is a refining influence from the arts of design on a prepared mind, which is as positive as that of music, and not to be supplied from any other source, but pictures, engravings, statues, and casts, besides that first costs entail expenses as of galleries and keepers for the exhibition, and the use which any man can make of them is rare, and their value too is much enhanced by the number of men who can share their enjoyment. In the Greek cities it was reckoned profane that any person should pretend property in a work of art, which belonged to all who could behold it. I think sometimes could I only have music on my own terms, could I live in a great city and know where I could get wherever I wish the ablution and inundation of musical waves that were a bath and a medicine. If properties of this kind were owned by states, towns, and licoms, they would draw the bonds of neighborhood closer. A town would exist to an intellectual purpose. In Europe, where the feudal forms secure the permanence of wealth for certain families, those families buy and preserve these things and lay them open to the public. But in America, where democratic institutions divide every estate into small portions, after a few years, the public should step into the place of these proprietors and provide their culture and inspiration for the citizens. Man was born to be rich, or inevitably grows rich by the use of his faculties. By the union of thought with nature, property is an intellectual production. The game requires coolness, right reasoning, promptness, and patience in the players. Cultivated labor derives out brute labor. An infinite number of shrewd men in infinite years have arrived at certain best and shortest ways of doing, and this accumulates skill in arts, cultures, harvestings, currings, manufactures, navigations, changes constitute the worth of our world today. Commerce is a game of skill which every man cannot play, which few men can play well. The right merchant is one who has the just average of faculties we call common sense. A man of a strong affinity for facts who makes up his decision on what he has seen. He is thoroughly persuaded of the truths of arithmetic. There is always a reason in the man for his good or bad fortune, and so in making money. Men talk as if there were some magic about us, and believe in magic in all parts of life. He knows that all goes on the old road, pound for pound, cent for cent, for every effect a perfect cause, and that good luck. In another, name for tenacity and purpose, he enjoyed himself in every transaction. And like small and sure gains, probity and closeness to the facts are the basis, but the masses of the art add a certain long arithmetic. The problem is to combine many and remote operations with accuracy and adherence to the facts, which is easy and near in small transactions. So to arrive at a gigantic result, without any compromise of safety, Napoleon was found of telling the story of Marseilles banker who said to his visitor, surprised at the contrast between the splendor of the banker's chateau and hospitality and the meanness of the counting room in which he had seen him, quote, young man, you are too young to understand how masses are formed. The true and only power, whether composed of money, water, or men, it is all alike. A mass is an immense center of motion. But it must be begun, it must be kept up, unquote. He might have added that the way in which it must be begun and kept up is by obedience to the law of particles. Success consists in close obedience to the law of the world. And since those laws are intellectual and moral obedience, political economy is as good a book wherein to read the life of man and the ascendancy of laws over all private and hostile influences as any Bible which has come down to us. Money is representative and follows the nature and fortunes of the owner. The coin is a delicate meter of civil, social, and moral changes. The farmer is covetous of his dollar, and with reason. It is no waif to him. He knows how many strokes of labor it represents. His bones ache with the day's work that earned it. He knows how much land it represents, how much rain, frost, and sunshine. He knows that in the dollar he gives you so much discretion and patience, so much hoeing and threshing. Try to lift his dollar. You must lift all that weight in the city where money follows the skit of a pen or a lucky rise in exchange. It comes to be looked on as light. I wish the farmer held it dearer and would spend it only for real bread, force for force. The farmer's dollar is heavy and the clerk's light is nimble. Leaps out of his pocket, jumps onto card and faro tables. But still more curious is its susceptibility to metaphysical changes. It is the finest barometer of social storms and announces revolutions. Every step of civil advancement makes every man's dollar worth more. In California, the country where it grew, what would it buy? A few years since, it would buy a shanty, a dysentery, hunger, bad company, and crime. There are wide countries like Siberia, where it would buy little else today than some petty mitigation of suffering. In Rome, it will buy beauty and magnificence. 40 years ago, a dollar would not buy much in Boston. Now it will buy a great deal more in our old towns, thanks to railroads, telegraphs, and steamers. And the contemporaneous growth of New York and the whole country. Yet there are many goods appertaining to a capital city which are not yet purchasable here. No, not with a mountain of dollars. A dollar in Florida is not worth a dollar in Massachusetts. A dollar is not value, but representative of value. A dollar is not value, but representative of value, and at last of moral values. A dollar is rated for the corn it will buy, or to speak strictly, not for the corn or house room, but for Athenian corn and Roman house room. For the wit, probity, and power which we eat bread and dwell in houses to share and exert. Wealth is mental, wealth is moral, but the value of a dollar is to buy just things. A dollar goes on increasing in value with all the genius and all the virtue of the world. A dollar in university is worth more than a dollar in jail. In a temperate, schooled, law-abiding community than in some sink of crime, where dice, knives, and arsenic are in constant play. The banknote detector is a useful publication, but the current dollar's silver paper is itself the detector of the right and wrong, where it circulates. It is not instantly enhanced by the increase of equity. If a trader refuses to sell his vote or adheres to some odious right, he makes so much more quality in Massachusetts, and every acre in the state is more worth in the hour of his action. If you take out of State Street the 10 honestest merchants and put in 10 roguish persons controlling the same amount of capital, the rates of insurance will indicate it. The soundness of banks will show it. The highways will be less secure. The schools will feel it. Children will bring home their little dose of the poison. The judge will sit less firmly on the bench, and his decisions will be less upright. He has lost so much support and constraint, which all need, and the pulpit will betray it. In a laxer rule of life, an ample tree, if you take out every day for a number of days a load of loam and put in a load of sand about its roots, will find it out. An apple tree is a stupid kind of creature, but if this treatment be pursued for a short time, I think it will begin to mistrust something. And if you should take out of the powerful class engaged in trade 100 good men and put in 100 bad, or what is just the same thing, introduce a demoralizing institution, wouldn't that the dollar, which is not much stupider than an apple tree, presently find it out? The value of a dollar is social, and it's created by society. Every man who moves into this city with any purchasable talent or skill in him gives to every man's labor in the city a new worth. If talent is ever born into the world, the economy of nations is enriched, and much more with a new degree of probity. The expense of crime, one of the principal charges of every nation, is so far stopped. In Europe, crime is observed to increase or abate with the price of bread. If the Rothschilds at Paris do not accept bills, the people at Manchester, at Paisley, at Birmingham are forced into the highway, and landlords are shot down in Ireland. The police records attest it. The vibrations are presently felt in New York, New Orleans, and Chicago. Not much otherwise. The economical power touches the masses through the political lords. Rothschild refuses the Russian loan, and there is peace and the harvest is saved. He takes it, and there is a way and an agitation to a large portion of mankind, with every hideous result ending in revolution and a new order. Wealth brings with it its own checks and balances. The basis of political economy is non-interference. The only safe rule is found in the self-adjusting meter of demand and supply. Do not legislate, meddle, and you snap the sinews with your sumptuary laws. Give no bounties. Make equal laws. Secure life and property, and you need not give alms. Open the doors of opportunity to talent and virtue, and they will do themselves justice, and property will not be in bad hands. In a free and just commonwealth, property rushes from the idle and imbecile to the industrious, brave, and preserving. The laws of nature play through trade as a toy battery exhibits the effect of electricity. The level of the sea is not more surely kept than is the equilibrium of value in society by the demand and supply. An artifice or legislation punishes itself by reactions, gluts, and bankruptcies. The sublime laws play indifferently through atoms and galaxies. Whoever knows what happened in the getting and spending of a loaf of bread and a pint of beer, that no wishing will change the rigorous limits of pints and penny loaves, that for all that is consumed so much less remains in the basket and pot. But what is gone out of these is not wasted, but well spent. It is, if it nourish his body and enable him to finish his task, knows all of political economy that the budgets of empires can teach him. The interest of petty economy is this symbolization of the great economy. The way in which a house and a private man's methods tally with the solar system and the laws of give and take throughout nature, and however weary we are of the falsehoods and petty tricks which we suicidally play off on each other, every man has a certain satisfaction whenever his dealing touches on the inevitable facts. When he sees that things themselves dictate the price, as they always tend to do, and the larger manufacturers are seen to do, your paper is not fine or coarse enough, is too heavy or too thin. The manufacturer says he will furnish you with just that thickness or thinness you want. The pattern is quite indifferent to him. Here is his schedule. Any variety of paper as cheaper or dearer, with the prices annexed. A pound of paper costs so much, and you may have it made up in any pattern you fancy. There is in all our dealings a self-regulation that supersedes chaffering. You'll rent a house, must have it cheap. The owner can reduce the rent, but so he is incap- incapacitates himself from making proper repairs, and the tenant gets not the house he would have, but a worse one. Besides that, a relation a little injurious is established between landlord and tenant. You dismiss your labor, saying, "Patrick, I shall send for you as soon as I cannot do without you." End quote. Patrick goes off contented, for he knows that the weeds will grow with the potatoes. The vines must be planted next week. And however unwilling you may be, the cantaloupes, crooknecks, and cucumbers will send for him, who but must wish that all labor and value should stand on the same simple and surely market. If it is the best of its kind, it will. We must have joiner, locksmith, planter, priest, poet, doctor, cook, weaver, ostler, each in turn through the year. If a St. Michael's pier sails for a shilling, it costs a shilling to raise. If in Boston the best securities offer 12% for money, they have just 6% of insecurity. You may not see that the fine pier costs you a shilling, but it costs the community so much. The shilling represents the number of enemies the pier has, and the amount of risk in ripening it. The price of coal shows the narrowness of the coal field, and a compulsory refinement of the mines to a different district. All salaries are reckoned or contingent as well as an actual services. Quote, if the wind were always south west by west, end quote, said the skipper. Quote, women might take ships to sea, end quote. One might say that all things are of one price, and nothing is cheaper or dearer, and that the apparent disparities that strike us are only a shopman's trick of concealing the damage in your bargain. A youth coming into the city from his native New Hampshire farm, with his heart fear still fresh in his remembrance, boards at a first-class hotel and believes he must somehow have outwitted Dr. Franklin and Malthus. For luxuries are cheap, but he pays for the one convenience of a better dinner by the loss of some of the richest social and educational advantages. He has lost what guards, what incentives. He will perhaps find by and by that he left the Moses at the door of the hotel and found the Furies inside. Money often costs too much, and power and pleasures are not cheap. The ancient poet said, quote, the gods sell all things at a fair price, end quote. There's an example of the compensations in the commercial history of this country. When the European wars ruled the carrying trade of the world, from 1800 to 1812, into American bottoms, a seizure was now in the mate of an American ship. Of course, the loss was serious to the owner, but the country was indemnified, for we charged 3p a pound for carrying cotton, 6p for tobacco, and so on, which paid for the risk and loss, and brought into the country an immense prosperity, early marriage, private wealth, the building of cities and of states. And after the war was over, we received compensation over and above the treaty for all the seizures. Well, the Americans grew rich and great, but the payday comes round. Britain, France, and Germany, which our extraordinary profits had impoverished, sent out, attracted by the fame of our advantages. First the thousands, then the millions of poor people to share the crop. At first we employ them and increase our prosperity. But in the artificial system of society and protected labor, which we also have adopted and enlarged, they come presently checks and stoppages. Then we refuse to employ these poor men, but they will not be so antsy. They go into the poor rates And though we refuse wages, we must now pay the same amount in the form of taxes. Again, it turns out that the largest proportion of crimes are committed by foreigners. The cost of the crime and the expense of courts and of prisons we must bear, and the standing army of preventive policies we must pay. The cost of education and posterity of this great colony I will not compute, but the gross amount of these costs will begin to pay back what we thought was a net gain from our transatlantic customer of 1800. It is vain to refuse this payment. We cannot get rid of these people, and we cannot get rid of the will to be supported. That has become an inevitable element of our policies, and for their votes, each of the dominant parties courts and assists them to get it executed. Moreover, we have to pay not what would have contented them at home, but what they have learned to think necessary here, so that opinion, fancy, and all manner of moral considerations complicate the problem. There are few measures of economy which will bear to be named without discuss. The subject is tender, and we may easily have too much of it, and therein resembles the hideous animalculus of which our bodies are built up, which offensive in the particular, yet compose valuable and effective masses. Our nature and genius force us to respect ends whilst we use means. We must use the means, and yet in our most accurate using somehow screen and cloak them, as we can only give them any beauty by reflection of the glory of the end. That is a good head, which serves the end and commands the means. The rabble and corrupted by the means are too strong for them, and they desert their end. Well, the first of these measures is that each man's expense must proceed from his character. As long as your genius buys, the investment is safe. Though you spend like a monarch, nature arms each man with some faculty which enables him to easily some feat impossible to any other, and thus makes him necessary to society. This native determination guides his labor and his spending. He wants an equipment of means and tools proper to his talents. And to save on this point, we're to neutralize the special strength and helpfulness of each mind. Do you do your work respecting the excellence of the work, and not its acceptableness. This is so much economy that we rightly read. It is a sum of economy. Profligacy consists not in spending years of time or chests of money, but in spending them off the line of your career. The crime which bankrupts men and states is job work, declining from your main design to serve a turn here or there. Nothing is beneath you. It is, if it is in the direction of your life, nothing is great or desirable. If it is from that, I think we are entitled here to draw a straight line and say that society can never prosper but must always be bankrupt until every man does that which he was created to do. Spend for your expense and retrench the expense which is not yours. Alston the painter was wont to say that he built a plain house and filled it with plain furniture because he would hold out no bribe to any to visit him who had not similar tastes to his own. We are sympathetic and, like children, want everything we see, but it is a large stride to independence when a man in the discovery of his proper talent has sunk the necessity for false expenses. As the betrothed maiden, by one secure affection, is relieved from a system of slaveries, the daily inculcated necessity of pleasing all. So the man who has found that he can spend on that and leave all other spending. Montaigne said, quote, when he was younger, quote, when he was a younger brother, he went brave in dress and equipage. But afterwards, his chatru and farmers might answer to him, end quote. Let a man who belongs to the class of nobles Those namely who have found out that they can do something relieve himself of all vague squandering on objects not his. Let the realist not mind appearances. Let him delegate to others the costly courtesies and decorations of social life. The virtues are economists, but some of the vices are also. Thus, next to humility, I have noticed that pride is a pretty good husband. A good pride is, as I reckon it, worth from 500 to 1500 a year. Pride is handsome, economical. Pride eradicates so many vices, letting none subsist by itself, that it seems as if it were a great gain to exchange vanity for pride. Pride can go without domestics, without fine clothes, can live in a house with 2 rooms, can eat potato, porcelain, beans, light corn, can work on the soil, can travel afoot, can talk with poor men, or sit silent while contented in fine saloons, but vanity costs money, labor, horses, men, women, health, and peace, and is still nothing at last. A long way leading nowhere. Only one drawback: proud people are intolerably selfish, and the vain are gentle and giving. Art is a jealous mistress, and if a man have a genius for painting, poetry, music, architecture, or philosophy, he makes a bad husband and an ill provider, and should be wise in season, and not fetter himself with duties which will embitter his days and spoil him from his proper work. We had his we had in this region 20 years ago among our educated men a sort of Arcadian fanaticism, a passionate desire to go upon the land and unite farming to intellectual pursuits. Many effected that purpose and made the experiment, and some became downright plowmen, but all were cured of their faith that scholarship and practical farming, I mean with one's own hands, could be united. With brow bent, with firm intent, the pale scholar leaves his desk to draw a freer breath and get a juster statement of his thought. In the garden walk, he stoops to pull up a purslane or a duck that is choking the young corn and finds there are two. Close behind the last is a third. He reaches out his hand to a fourth. Behind that are 4,001. He is heated and untuned, and by wakes up from his idiot dream of chickweed and red root to remember his morning thought, and to find that with his adamantine purposes has been duped by a dandelion. A garden is like those pernicious machineries we read of every moment in the newspapers, which catch a man's coat skirt or his hand and draw in his arm, his leg, and his whole body to irresistible destruction. In an evil hour he pulled down his wall and added a field to his homestead. No land is bad, but land is worse. If a man own land, the land owns him. Now let him leave home, if he dare. Every tree and graft, every hill of melons, row of corn, or quickest hedge, all he has done and all he means to do, stand in his way like duns. For he would go out of his gate the devotion to these vines and trees he finds poisonous. Long free walks, a circuit of miles, free his brain and serve his body. Long marches are no hardship to him. He believes he composes easily on the hills, but this pottering in a few square yards of garden is dispiriting and driveling. The smell of plants has drudged him and robbed him of energy. He finds a catalepsy in his bones. He grows peevish and poor-spirited. The genius of reading and of gardening are antagonistic, like resinous, like resinous and virtuous electricity. One is concentrative and sparks and shocks. The other is diffuse strength, so that each disqualifies its workman for the other's duties. Let's repeat that again. He finds a catalepsy in his bones. He grows peevish and poor-spirited. The genius of reading and gardening are antagonistic. Like resinous and virtuous electricity, one is concentrative and sparks and shocks the other and diffuse, so that each disqualifies its workman for the other's duties. An engraver whose hands must be an exquisite delicacy of stroke should not lay stone walls. Sir David Brewster gives exact instructions for microscopic observation. Quote, lie down on your back, hold a single lens, and object over your eye. End quote, etc. etc. He much more the seeker of abstract truth, who needs periods of isolation and rapt concentration and almost a going out of the body to think, to spend after your genius. And by system, nature goes by rule, not by sallies and salations. There must be system in the economy. Saving and unexpensiveness will not keep the most pathetic family from ruin. Nor will bigger incomes make free spending safe. The secret of success lies never in the amount of money, but in the relation of income to alcohol. As after expense has been fixed at a certain point, then new and steady rills of income, though never so small, being added, wealth begins. But in ordinary as means increase, spending increase faster, so that large incomes in England and elsewhere are found not to help matters. The eating quality of debts does not relax its veracity. With the cholera is in the potato, what is the use of planting larger crops? In England, the richest country in the universe, I was assured by shrewd observers that great lords and ladies had no more genius, genius to give away than other people. The liberality with money is as rare and as immediately famous a virtue as it is here. Waldo's growing giant, whom the coat of half was never large enough to cover. I remember in Warwickshire to have been shown a fair manor, still in the same name as in Shakespeare's time. The rent roll, I was told, in some £14,000 a year. But when the second son of the late proprietor was born, the father was perplexed how to provide for him. The eldest son must inherit a manor. What to do with this supernumeracy? He was advised to breed him for the church and to settle him in the rectorship, which was in the gift of the family, which was done. It is a general rule in that country that bigger incomes do not help anybody. It is commonly observed that a sudden wealth, like a prize drawn in a lottery or a large bequest to a poor family, does not permanently enrich. They have served no apprenticeship to wealth. And with the rapid wealth come and rapid claims. And with the rapid wealth come rapid claims which they do not know how to deny. And the treasure is quickly dissipated. A system must be in every economy, or the best single expedients are of no avail. A farm is a good thing when it begins and ends with itself, and does not need a salary or a shop to eke it out. Thus the cattle are main link in the chain ring. If the nonconformist or aesthetic farmer leaves out the cattle and does not also leave out the want which cattle must supply, he must fill the gap by begging or stealing. When men now alive were born, the farm yielded everything that was consumed on it. The farm yielded no money, and no farmer got on without. If he fell sick, his neighbors came in to his aid. Each gave a day's work, or half a day, or lent his yoke of oxen, or his horse, and kept his work even. Hoed his potatoes, mowed his hay, reaped his rye, well knowing that no man could afford to hire labor without selling his land. In order a farmer could sell an ox or a hog and get a little money to pay taxes withal. Now the farmer buys almost all he consumes: tinware, cloth, sugar, tea, coffee, fish, coal, railroad tickets, and newspapers. A master in each art is required, because the practice is never with still or dead subjects, but they change in your hands. You think farm buildings and broad acres a solid property, but its value is flowing like water. It requires as much watching as if you were decanting wine from a cask. The farmer knows that to do with it, stops every leak, turns all the streamlets to one reservoir, and decants wine. But a blunderhead comes out of Cornhill, tries his hand, and it all leaks away. So is it with granite streets. or timber town or township, as with fruit or flowers, not in any investment so permanent that it can be allowed to remain without incessant watching, as the history of each attempt to lock up an inheritance through 2 generations for an unborn inheritor may show. When Mr. Cocaine takes a cottage in the country and will keep his cow, he thinks a cow is a creature that is fed on hay and gives a pail of milk twice a day, but the cow that he buys gives milk for 3 months. Then her bag dries up. What to do with a dry cow? Who will buy her? Perhaps he bought also a yoke of oxen to do his work, but they get blown and lame. What to do with blown and lame oxen? The farmer fattens after the spring work is done and skills them in the fall. But how can Cocaine, who has no pastures and leaves his cottage daily in the cars at business hours, he bothered with fatting and killing oxen? He plants trees, but there must be crops. To keep the trees in plowed land, what shall be the crops? He will have nothing to do with trees, but will have grass. After a year or two, the grass must be turned up and plowed. Now what crops? Credulous Cocaine. 3. Help comes in the custom of the country and the rule of imperio parendo. The rule is not to dictate nor to insist on carrying out each of your schemes by ignorant willfulness, but to learn practically the secrets spoken from all nature, that things themselves refuse to be mismanaged and will show to the watchful their own law. Nobody needs stir hand or foot. The custom of the country will do it all. I know not how to build or to plant, neither how to buy wood, nor what to do with the house lot, the field or the wood lot, when bought. Never fear, it is all settled how it shall be long beforehand in the custom of the country, whether to sand or whether to clay it, when to plow and how to truss, whether to grass or to corn, and you cannot help or hinder it. Nature has her own best mode of doing each thing, and she has somewhere told it plainly. If we will keep our eyes and ears open, if not, she will not be slow in this undeceiving us when we prefer our own way to hers. How often must we remember the art of the surgeon, which in replacing the broken bone contents itself with releasing the parts from false position. They fly into place by the action of the muscles. On this art of nature all our arts rely. One of the 2 eminent engineers in the recent construction of railways in England, Mr. Brunner, went straight from terminus to terminus, through mountains, over streams, crossing highways, cutting ducal estates in two, and shooting through this man's cellar and that man's attic window, and so arriving at his end, at great pleasure to geometers, but with cost to his company. Mr. Stevenson, on the contrary, believing that the river knows the way, followed his valley as implicitly as our Western Railroad follows the Westfield River, and turned out to be the safest and cheapest engineer. We say the cows laid out Boston. Well, there are worse surveyors. Every pedestrian in our pastures has frequent occasion to thank the cows for cutting the best path through the thicket and over the hills, and traveling the Indians. And travelers and Indians know the values of a buffalo trail, which is sure to be the easiest possible pass through the ridge. When a citizen fresh from Dock Square of Milk Street comes out and buys land in the country, his first thought is to a fine outlook from his window. His library must command a western view, a sunset every day, bathing the shoulder of Blue Hills, Wachusett, and the peaks of Monadnock, and Uncannock, with 30 acres, and all these magnificence for $1,500. It would be cheap at $50,000. He proceeds at once, his eyes dim with tears of joy, to fix the spot for his cornerstone. But the man who is to level the ground thinks it will take many hundreds loads of gravel to fill the hollow up to the road. The stonemason who should build the well thinks he shall have to dig 40 feet. The baker doubts he shall never like to drive up to the door. The practical neighbor cavils at the possession of the barn, and the citizen comes to know that his predecessor, the farmer built the house in the right spots for the sun and wind, the spring and water drainage, and the convenience to the pasture, the garden, the field, and the road, so Dock Square yields the point, and things have their own way. Use has made the farmer wise, and the foolish citizen learns to take his counsel. From step to step he comes at last to surrender at discretion. The farmer affects to take his orders, but the citizen says, "You may ask me as often as you will, and in what ingenious forms, for an opinion concerning the mode of building my wall, or sinking my well, or laying out my acre, but the ball will rebound to you. These are matters on which I need know no need to know anything. These are questions which you and not I shall answer, not less within doors a system settles itself, paramount and tyrannical, over master and mistress, servant and child, cousin and acquaintance. It is in vain that genius or virtue or energy of character strive and cry against it. This is fate, and it is very well that the poor husband reads in a book of a new way of living and resolves to adopt it at home. Let him go home and try it if he dare. Another point of economy is to look for seed of the same kind as you sow, and not to hope to buy one kind with another kind. Friendship buys friendship, justice, military merit, military success. Good husbandry finds wife, children, and household. The good merchant, large gains, ships, stocks, and money. The good poet, fame and literary credit, but not either the other. Yet there is commonly confusion of expectations on these points. Hotspur lives for the moment, praises himself for it, and despises for long that he does not. Hotspur, of course, is poor, and for long a good provider. The odd circumstance is that Hotspur thinks it is a superiority in himself. This improvidence, which ought to be rewarded with Forlong's glance. I have not at all completed my design, but we must not leave the topic without casting one glance into the interior recesses. It is a doctrine of philosophy that man is being of degrees, that there is nothing in the world which is not repeated in his body, and his body being a sort of miniature of summary of the world. Then that there is nothing in his body which is not repeated as in a celestial sphere in his mind. Then there is nothing in his brain which is not repeated in a higher sphere in his moral system. 5. Now these things are so in nature, all things ascend, and the royal rule of economy is that it should ascend also, or whatever we do must always have a higher aim. Thus it is a maxim that money is another kind of blood, pecunia ultra sanguis, or the state of a man is only a larger kind of body, and in the midst of regimen analogous to his body circulations. So there is no maxim of the merchant which does not admit of an extended sense, e.g., quote, best use of money is to pay debts, end of quote. Quote, every business by itself, end quote. Quote, best time is present time, end quote. Quote, the right investment is in tools of your trade, end quote. And like the counting room maxims liberally expounded are laws of the universe. The merchant's economy is a core symbol of the soul's economy. It is to spend for power and not for pleasure. It is to invest income, that is to say, to take up particulars into generals, days into integral errors, literary, emotive, practical of its life, and still to ascend in its investment. The merchant has but one rule: absorb and invest. He is to be capitalist. The scraps and fillings must be gathered back into the crucible. The gas and smoke must be burned, and earnings must not go to increase expense, but to capital gain. Well, the man must be capitalist. Will he spend his income, or will he invest? His body and every organ is under the same law. His body is a jar in which the liquor of life is stored. Will he spend for pleasure? The way to ruin is short and facile. Will he not spend but hoard for power? It passes through the sacred fermentations. By that law of nature whereby everything climbs to higher platforms and bodily vigor becomes mental and moral vigor. The bread he eats is for strength and animal spirits. It becomes in higher laboratories. Imagery and thought and instill higher results, courage and endurance. This is the right compound interest. This is capital doubled, quadrupled, centupled, a man raised to his highest power. The true thrift is always to spend on the higher plane, to invest and invest with keener avarice, that he may spend in spiritual creation and not in augmenting minimal existence. Nor is the man enriched in repeating the old experiments of animal sensation, nor unless through new powers and ascending pleasures he knows himself by the actual experience of higher good to be already on the way to the highest. Okay. We shall continue on the next video to read from this next essay. It's called Culture. So we are currently on page 716. The next video we shall read from Culture. Please feel free to share your thoughts, your comments, your feedback, your insights. Please let me know what you think of my reading style. Does it resonate with your ears? I want to hear about it. Please like or dislike this video. It's important for this channel. It gets some traffic on the channel moving. Please subscribe if you haven't already. It also helps with the traffic. I appreciate it. I look forward to hearing from you. Keep on shining your light. You are beautiful. You are perfect. You're much loved.